To begin this story, I want to note that I live in a very rural area in the Pacific Northwest, with lots of dense forest all around where my home is. This experience happened in late fall of 2016 at my high school, and it's really messed me up mentally, and I have no clue what to believe in anymore. I'm a new student at my school and just moved from the town over. I moved because I was having lots of issues at my old school with bullying, and I became very depressed over time. I just needed a fresh start. I loved my new school and the people that attended it. These folks were really down to earth, and I've already made very close friends for being there for the short time I have. I always tended to get to my school early in the mornings because I was that kind of person. Since my first class of the day was drama and theater, I would just walk in there, sit down, and chat with my teacher, Mr. W, or Wally. I wasn't really the social type in the mornings anyway. I liked peace and quiet. Let me add that our theater is huge. It's about 45 feet tall and 60 feet wide, maybe 80 to 90 feet long. It only has 2 exits and no windows. The 2 exits are the door you come into that is connected to the inside of the school. Everyone enters through that door, and I mean everyone, except for Mr. Woolley. He comes through the back door that is behind the stage. I will add that there is a large forest across from that door, and I do believe it's only for staff for safety reasons. I don't even know if they lock it or not, because it's sort of hidden away from the outside. It was this morning that changed everything, and I mean everything. As I said before, I get to school early, because my mom had to commute to work early, so she just dropped me off at 6 in the morning. But that's how I like it. School started at 7:20. I had a long wait ahead of me, but it didn't bug me at all, really. So I walked into the theater, doing my regular routine, when I noticed something was very off. First, I will start with the cold. It was freezing in there, and it was never like that before. Then I noticed something else. It was pitch black dark in there. Let me state that Wally was always in the drama room at 5 in the morning, with the lights on and ready to teach. But it was just all wrong this morning, and it was out of character for him. I turned the lights on for the audience seats in the 3/4 of the theater, and they beamed on. But that wasn't all the lights. The stage lights would also have to be turned on backstage. As I walked toward the stage, I noticed the curtain was down for some reason. Now, the curtain was never down. So I kinda got creeped out. In situations that were out of order or scary, I would panic very fast. But then I heard movement and some kind of clanging noise at the top balcony of the theater. The balcony was behind the curtain, and the noise sounded like someone or something was pacing up there. But it was all wrong. It did not sound like regular human footsteps. It was like metal on metal or something. Something heavy against the metal floor of the balcony. It sounded like there was some sort of large animal up there, but there was no way an animal could climb up a freaking ladder. Then it just stopped. I slowly walked to the middle of the curtain and stopped and listened. I then heard the footsteps on the ground. This was freaky. How did whatever it was get down from the balcony to the floor so fast, without being heard? I mean, this thing sounded heavy before, and then it made no noise to just simply get down. At this point, you're probably wondering why I didn't just run out of there. But I couldn't. I was both curious and frozen with fear. I was a statue. Then, as the steps began to go to the right, to the end of the curtain, I did something really stupid. I called out to it. "Wally? Is that you? Are you okay?" Big mistake. The footsteps stopped. Everything was dead silent. I called Wally's name again. Then I saw his head pop out from behind the curtain, with an odd smile on his face. I was both relieved and cautious. What was he doing back there in a dark room, messing around trying to scare people? Something was up, and this was totally out of character for him. "Wooly, what are you doing?" I said. "Are you on drugs or something?" I know I shouldn't have said that to my teacher, but I was both angry and scared. I was nervous. I wanted answers. As I started walking towards him, I noticed something else. It was just his head peeking out from the curtain. No arms, no legs or body, just his head. And it didn't look like him exactly. It looked like someone had copied and pasted a picture of his face while he was laughing. It was just messed up. "Wally, why aren't you talking?" I said like a little girl. "Are you okay?" He was still staring at me with a stupid smile. And finally, he stuck out his hand and motioned me to come behind the curtain. And I could only stare in horror, and I couldn't even breathe, as I realized that those were not Wally's hands. Those were not human hands. They were covered in thick brown fur from the start of the forearm to as far as I could see up his arm. The hand was hairless and had dark gray skin, and the hand had sharp, long claws at the end of it. He looked at me straight in the eye and said with an old raspy voice that was not Wally's, "Come here, child. Come with me." And as he said this, his eyes turned a deep shade of red. And that's when I ran out of there so fast. Everything happened so quickly. When I ran, this freaking thing, I heard its footsteps heavy behind me. It chased me to the exit door of the theater. I could hear what sounded like hooves stomping on the floor. I did not dare look behind me, because that would just slow me down, and I was not getting caught by this thing, whatever it was. Then I heard the thing start to howl or cry or something. Either way, it was scary as hell. My heart was pounding. I have never been that scared in my entire life. Just as I was about to reach the door, the thing stopped, about 2 meters close. And that's when I turned to look at it. It was motionless, standing there. It stood several feet taller than me, and I could see that it was all covered in fur, except for the hands, but I could not tell because it was still too dark. Then it started this creepy chant. It was chanting my freaking name. Had enough. I bolted out of the door to the safety of the office, and the moment I opened the door, I ran face first into Wally, the real Wally. I didn't know what to say. What even was that thing if Wally was right there? I just started to cry. I saw that he was confused too, so he just led me to the office. I sat down with Wally, the principal, and the vice principal, and a school cop. I explained everything to them and told them that it was still there. At first, everyone thought I was on drugs and looked at me very silly. Wally said that he was not there because he was late in a traffic jam, and that he woke up too late this morning. That sent shivers down my spine. I mean, how did that thing have Wally's face? During their little investigation, no one was allowed in the theater. I remained in the office with Wally, just talking about the incident. When the cop came back in, she looked very puzzled. I asked her what was wrong. She began to say that while investigating, the first things they noticed was a very nasty stench in there, not to mention it was oddly cold. They checked everywhere in there, and she said they found only one thing. She was hesitant at first to say anything about it, but then she finally gave in. She said that there were muddy footprints everywhere. They went all the way up to the metal balcony. I was even more terrified when she said the next part. She said that the footprints led to the open and unlocked back door outside and went into the woods. But the tracks just stopped shortly into those woods. Nobody at the school knew about this, and I was even told not to tell any of the other students. They didn't want anyone being scared. I've been going to counseling after this, and I am so scared this thing will end up at my house or something. I only live about a half a mile down the road. I have nightmares every night and cry more than usual now. I sleep with my door to my room locked, and the blinds to my windows closed. I've heard stories about the goatman long before this incident, but now I just wonder, was this some stupid prank, or was it real? All I know for sure is that I'm transferring out of that class, and I'm never being that early to school again. What still baffles me, though, is how that thing knew my name. I live in Illinois, right by the border of Indiana. Now, living in the Midwest, there are a lot of paranormal stories regarding the legendary Goatman and how he stalks the woods of Illinois and Indiana. I thought it was a load of crap, to be honest, and by God, I was wrong. It was the fall of 2015, and I had just gotten my driver's license, so I was obviously looking forward to driving with my friends. I picked up my friends Sharon and Riley, and we went driving on country roads. We were talking about anything and everything going on, excited about our senior year, when suddenly a deer ran across the road. It scared the heck out of me. At least it wasn't the Goatman, Sharon joked, obviously referring to the rash of sightings around this place lately. "Oh, shut up, that's just a story to keep kids out of the woods," I replied. "Okay then, prove me wrong," Sharon said. I took that as a challenge. We began heading to the area where the latest sighting happened the month prior, and honestly, I was a bit nervous. We pulled onto the road, and I stopped. "What are you doing?" Sharon asked, a little confused. Out of the window, I let out my best goat sound, laughing as I sat back down in my seat. See? Told you it was. Before I could finish, suddenly, an ear-piercing shriek came from the woods ahead of us. It was terrifying and insanely loud. It sounded goat-like, and a scream fused together. And at the same time, I felt very stupid for making that call into the woods. We were all quiet. Then the sound came again, much, much closer. "We need to get the hell out of here," Riley screamed. I floored the gas so hard my tires spun before taking off. We were driving down the road, and then I took the curve, and my lights caught the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. In the field nearby, only about 15 feet from my car, was this creature. It had legs like a goat, matted and gray. The torso was human, with the same matted and dirty hair, and its freaking head. It was like a goat's, with horns, but it had a human face. "Are you seeing this?" Sharon asked, anxious and shaky. Riley's eyes were wide and her mouth opened. Not once in my life have I ever seen her this scared. And I was terrified. I felt like it was staring into my soul. Suddenly, this animal screamed again. And I kid you not, it charged at our car. We screamed, and I floored it again as fast as I could. The road was straight at that point, and it was bright that night. Riley could not stop looking out of the back window, yelling up to the front, "It's still there!" I gazed into my rearview mirror, and the creature was coming up on us, unnaturally fast. I pushed the gas even harder. We must have been going 80 miles per hour at that point. The next time I looked in the mirror, it was gone. A few minutes later, we got to the main road, and we headed straight to Riley's house as hers was the closest. When I finally parked and turned off the car, we just sat there in silence for about 15 minutes. We didn't talk, we didn't move. I guess we were all just trying to take it all in. Finally, still in silence, we all got into the car and walked into the house. We went to Riley's room. We were wary since the road where we saw that thing was barely 10 minutes away. We just closed the curtains and watched TV, and we ate some pizza. It took a while, but soon we were laughing again and acting like usual. But not one moment during that night did the thought of that thing leave my mind. The next day, as I drove Sharon home, we decided to go on that road again, since it was bright sunny that day and we were getting brave. We saw the tire marks that we left, and we slowed down by the field where we saw the thing. In the dirt right outside the window, there were 2 hooves, going about 2 inches into the ground. "We saw the freaking goatman," I said, both stunned and a bit disturbed. Now, every time I go to Riley's, I can't help but think, where is this thing at now? And that question terrifies me.
My name is Alexander, and at the time of this story, I was 18 years old, freshly graduated from high school. I was living in a relatively small town. Besides pubs and nightclubs, there wasn't much to do. But I really wanted to do something new and adventurous. It was a hot night in July. I was playing Far Cry at midnight when my phone rang. It was a very good friend of mine from high school who I will call Hunter. The 2 of us are night owls. It's not uncommon for us to call each other at such hours. We chatted for a bit, and then he invited me to spend some days at his cabin in the woods, 60 miles away from the city. Many of those we went to high school with were coming as well. It sounded interesting, so I instantly said hell yes. We were going to leave in 2 days, with his car and mine. I was super excited to spend some quality time in nature, because I've never really been much of an outdoorsy person. So there were 8 of us, 5 in his car, which actually was an SUV, and 3 in mine. His cabin was pretty isolated from the world. We followed a gravel mountain road, and then there was a clearing where the cabin was. We unpacked our stuff, and of course, we had our fun right off the bat. The music was at high volume. We made some barbecue. We hiked on the mountain trails, and then we started drinking until we were all laughing at the most stupid things. So, our first day was okay. No incident. But until the next evening, we somehow finished all of our food and drinks. So, someone had to go 5 miles down the road to the nearest town and do some shopping. Well, I didn't really want to go. I just wanted to stay and relax. So Hunter took a few friends and left. So, at the time, it was just me, Dan, Lisa, and Sarah. Dan was watching TV in the living room, and the girls were not feeling so good, so they were somewhere in a room upstairs. As for me, I was on the first floor balcony, just watching the woods around me, listening to music on my phone. It must have been 10 at night, and Hunter and the others hadn't come back yet. I was still chilling on the balcony, just watching my surroundings. I noticed it was a full moon, so it was not too dark outside. All of a sudden, I heard some rustling and twigs snapping in the distance. At first, I didn't really think much of it. There were so many animals wandering around those woods anyway. I was just feeling strange. My body was for some reason on full alert, and there was a sudden silence. It was that cliché feeling of being watched, but I tried my best to just brush it off. Eventually, I gave up, and I wanted to go inside. I wanted to see what my friends were up to. But as I stood up from the chair, something in the distance caught my eye. I stood still and focused a little, and I could clearly see something peeking over a tree at least 30 feet in the distance. This thing was just peeking out for a few seconds, then it hid behind the tree and peeked out again, like it wanted to be as stealthy as possible. To be honest, it looked like a goat, maybe a mountain goat or something. The weird part is, though, that the head was very far off the ground. So either it was the tallest goat I've ever seen, or maybe he was standing on something behind the tree that I couldn't see. But that wasn't all. Something was off about the goat. Its eyes were red and yellowish and glowing, staring right at me from that distance. I was just staring back, not moving a muscle, even though I was safe at the balcony in case things went down. I think I was trying to figure out what the hell kind of animal that was, or if I was just imagining things. After 5 minutes of staring at the thing, it dashed under another tree, and I could see it more clearly now. This wasn't your average goat. It was skinny, extremely tall. Definitely at least 7 feet tall, looking like a human, but with a goat head. But somehow its hands were more dog-like. I was completely disturbed by what I was seeing, but at the same time curious. I ran inside at that moment. I grabbed Dan and a flashlight, and I wanted to show him this creature. But when I came back, the creature was gone. Frustrated, I scanned the tree line, looking in every direction to find the thing. Lucky enough, I saw it again. Several meters away from where it was before. I saw it and pointed to it with the flashlight. It was closer now, this time standing on all 4 feet. "Holy crap, man, what is that?" Dan asked me. He sounded as spooked as I was. As he was talking to me, the creature made the most creepy growl I have ever heard in my life. It was like a cat being strangled, mixed with a wolf's howl and a demented screaming woman. I'm sorry, but this is the best way I can explain it. In the moment we heard it, we ran back inside and bursted into the girls' room. They were sleeping and were very angry for us entering so loud, but we didn't care because we were just looking out of the window to see if the thing was still there. It was now standing on 2 feet and looking straight at our window, making that creepy growling noise again. This time, the girls heard it too and asked who the hell was making that sound. And when they saw at the window the thing that was making that noise, they began to scream. We didn't know what to do. I wanted to call Hunter, but there was no signal in that area. Shortly after, we heard the car pulling in the driveway. They were back. They came inside with the food and drinks and were getting ready for the party. Of course, we told them what we saw and they did not believe us. I took Hunter out to the balcony to see if the thing may be around, which I very much doubted because if it had been around, Hunter and the rest would have seen it or heard it from the car as they were pulling in. He wanted to be the hero though after I told him, and he offered to take a flashlight and his gun to search around. He simply thought we saw a bear or something like that. 2 other guys went with him to search. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of patrolling around, they came back, and they were telling us that we were nuts and drank too much. So we all started drinking together, and eventually we forgot about everything that happened. Until 3 in the morning. There was me, Dan, Hunter being the last guy standing and drinking when Hunter said that he needed to take some things from the car. He went outside. After 3 minutes we heard him running and entering the door. He slammed it hard behind him. His face was pale white. He sounded very serious even in his drunken state. "Guys, tomorrow we're leaving. Just get some sleep and after you wake up pack your things." "But what's going on?" me and Dan asked. "Okay, I saw it. Eyes glowing, very tall, just behind the car. and looked like it was waiting for me, and then I heard it growl. We remembered the episode from earlier, and we were pretty disturbed by it. I still don't know what I saw that day, be it a goatman or skinwalker or wendigo or something. Doing some research on the internet, many creatures might match the description of the thing. Since then, we haven't been back, and we never talk about the experience. And Hunter even began to rent the cabin out to other people. I have no idea what we saw. For privacy reasons, I will not use my real name or anyone else involved in the story. The story all started when I was 10. I was camping with 3 of my friends, Dan, Ryan, and Connor, all 3 4 years older than me, but we did manage our friendship even with the large gap. So we all went up to Tioga County, Pennsylvania to celebrate Dan's birthday. His father, who we'll call Frank, drove us all up there to one of the campsites. We started to set up our tents until we heard rustling in the bushes. They were about 5 inches away from the campsite. At first we thought it was a coyote or something like that, but that wasn't the case. Everyone was frozen, not trying to make any noise to startle whatever the hell this was. But I couldn't stay still. I grabbed my rifle. It was a Remington Model 700 BDL. My father had given it to me before he was deployed in Iraq. I always had 4 or 5 bullets with me, just in case one bullet wasn't enough. I slowly walked towards the bush, with my rifle raised and ready. But the bush was now still and quiet. Ryan began to mumble, and then he said, "Liam." He sounded very, very startled as he said it. And that's when I immediately saw something. And whatever it wasn't human. It stood about 7 feet tall, with goat-like legs. I am a fan of the paranormal, and instantly I knew that this thing must have been the goatman. The thing was just standing there on top of the hill, staring down at us. We all stood still for what felt like the longest minute of our lives, not knowing what to do but panicking on the inside. It was as if we were frozen in a trance, until eventually the thing turned around and walked away. We couldn't stop talking about what we saw all night. It was really the most bizarre thing we'd ever seen. 4 years later, we went back to that very same campsite because Connor would be going to the army a few days later. Everything was all right, that is, until 11:30 that first night. I began to hear screaming, or at least they sounded like screams. I quickly got up, grabbing my same Model 700 BDL, as well as getting out of the tent, and I swear, that same thing that we saw before, it was there again, now ripping apart a deer. Even having a strong stomach, as I'd done some butchering with my cousin in the past, it made me sick watching this thing. I could hear it gnashing and tearing. So I quickly loaded a bullet into the chamber, slamming the bolt forwards. I fired at its leg, and the moment the bullet hit, the thing snapped its head toward me and let out a blood-curdling scream. I loaded another round, but the thing took off. Dan, Connor, and Ryan, all saying in unison, "What the heck, Liam? Why'd you do that?" I wasn't surprised that they had yelled at me, but I did tell them what happened. And they believed me. We'd all seen it before, and they believed me 100%. We all barely slept that night. At 6 in the morning, we packed our things and left without question. I hadn't shot it. I have no idea what it would have done to me or my friends. The story I'm about to tell you just happened recently. I don't know what it was, or if my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I'll never forget it. I'm 16 years old. I live in a small town in New York. There's a population of 3,000 people, but during the summer it's tourist season, so our little town gets packed. I live about 2 miles from town in the country. There are houses up and down my road, but they are spaced pretty far from one another. We're surrounded by forest, which during the day is really nice to explore. But at night, it takes on a very eerie tone. There aren't any streetlights on the road, so it's just pitch black, unless the moon is out or you're near a house with lights on. I've always been a sucker for scary stories, even though they always do scare me and make me very paranoid. Even before that, I was always scared of being outside at night, as I'm afraid of the dark and coyotes come pretty close. But what I saw the other night was no coyote. We have 4 dogs in our house. I just got a puppy, who we keep away from the other 2 most of the time. I have another older one and 2 big black dogs. One is a lab pit bull mix and the other is a German shepherd. The puppy is mine, so I always take her outside myself, but my dad or brother will usually take care of the other 3. My dad took the 3 dogs outside for their nightly walk. I was hanging out with my brother when my dad comes in and tells us that Molly, the German shepherd, got away from him because he dropped her leash. Molly is my brother's dog, so he was pretty mad to hear the news. I put my pup on her leash while the boys put their headlamps on to look for her. I grabbed a high-power flashlight and stepped outside, where it was pitch black, merely yards from the house. We kept calling for her, using whistling sounds. About a mile behind my house and my neighbors, there's a dense forest where she likes to run, to hunt and smell for deer. Between that space, there's a large field and a barn for cows and horses. My other neighbors have made 4-wheeler trails around the farm and back to the woods. If our dogs get out, they always like to run back there. But we still get nervous for them to be too near to the road, because people always speed down that road. Nobody would see her, especially since her fur was pitch black. I'm scared to be out at night, hearing all these scary stories about strange creatures lurking near their homes. So we're out there, my dad and brother are walking towards the back forest, where there are 2 other houses they have to pass. Both have dogs and we're on good terms, so they don't mind when we hike through their properties. I'm walking my little pup on our little road that stretches from the main one and goes to my neighbor's. I keep calling out for Molly, and I can still hear the boys calling for her too. My dog stops when we get further away from the house and towards a path with tall grass. I wasn't about to walk that at night, so I just shone my flashlight around. Then I heard rustling coming about 20 feet away from me. My dog starts to pull toward the noise, but I pull her back. I don't let her go any further from where we're standing. Then she begins to growl at the noise. I didn't think much of it. She's scared of strange noises unfamiliar to her. She will always bark at something, even if it's just my brother coming up the stairs. I forget to mention that my mom is out of town. She would have had a cow if she knew that my dad lost one of the dogs at night, but I was still planning on telling her when she got home. I start walking in another direction when I hear a low growl. I think it's my dog, but she has turned around and whimpering to go home. I shone my flashlight in the direction where I heard it, because it could have been Molly growling at me. Her sight is going a bit, so I called out her name. It wasn't Molly. Eyes were shining against my flashlight's beam. It seemed as if whatever this thing was crouching down in the tall brush, like it was waiting to pounce. It growled again. I could tell this thing had dark grayish hair on it. It stood like a man, but it was certainly not human. My dog started to bark and I screamed as this thing slowly inched forward. I turned and ran, and I could hear somebody squishing in the mud behind me. It was heavy, and I ran as hard as I could. My house was only a few feet in front of me, but this thing suddenly stopped, and it turned in the opposite direction. I ran through the garage door and into the house. I locked all the doors except for the garage, because my brother and dad still had to come through it. They were still outside. I was scared for them, as they would probably be passing that thing. My heart was racing. I began to feel cold in my chest, which indicated to me that I was going to have a panic attack. I suffer severely from anxiety and I have other health issues, so running took a toll on me. I heard the garage door downstairs slam, and I ran to my room, my dog following behind me, but she simply thought I was playing with her. I locked the door to my bedroom and opened the door that connected to my bathroom and locked that too. I was shaking, so ready to cry. I heard footsteps down the hallway. I'm fearing for my life. I swear I almost pissed myself. I was so scared. But then it was my brother's voice that came from the other side of the door. "Hey, are you okay? We heard you scream. We found Molly. I guess she saw something and chased it." At that point, I could barely tell him that I was fine, that I was just really tired. I knew if I told him what happened, he wouldn't believe me. He believes in things that he can prove. That night, I did not get any sleep. My whole body was aching, and I kept the lights on. Whatever that thing was, I will never venture into those dense woods ever again.
Let me start off by saying I'm a 16-year-old boy. I grew up hearing stories from Boggy Creek to La Llorona, sometimes even about the goatman. Me and my girlfriend were planning a date for weeks, so I decided to pick her up and take her out to dinner. We ended up having a really nice time, but we still wanted to hang out with each other. So I invited her to come with me to my brother's place. They lived right by her, so I could walk her home whenever I wanted. She called her dad and told him she was going with me, that I would walk her home myself afterwards. He said okay, so we went to my brother's. We made a fire and sat under the canopy. My brother told us stories, but one we really enjoyed was the story of the goatman. My brother said, "I saw him just up the hill over there." He swore that it was true, but we didn't actually believe him. After a while, my brother left inside, so me and my girlfriend began to make out. At one point, she checked the time, and she said it was 11, and she had to be back by 12. I said okay and kept it in mind. And to note, we are in the country, so keep that in your head. We kept kissing, but we were soon interrupted by my brother's dog barking. He sounded frantic. We got up and went inside to get some of my hunting gear. I'd left my gear there the week prior. I grabbed my shotgun and I gave her a 9mm handgun and a flashlight. I had no problem with this because she was no stranger to shooting guns. So we went to check out what the dogs were barking at, but there was nothing out there. After waiting and looking around for a bit, we went inside. We accidentally fell asleep and woke up at about 12:30. She knew she'd already be in trouble, so my girlfriend called her dad. She lied and said that she had gone over to her friend Sarah's house, and that they had fallen asleep. So he told her it was okay that she could spend the night. And my brother was okay with her staying there, so we went back to bed. I got up at around 2 in the morning to get a glass of water. While I was drinking, something moved outside as a large shadow passed over the window and was exemplified by the bright streetlights outside. By then the dogs began to bark and go nuts again, so I woke up my girlfriend and told her to get the guns and flashlight. I told her to keep the lights steady while I looked around, but when we went out there our stomachs sank because we saw something standing tall, something that was almost a goat, but only in the head and the legs because the rest of its body was human. I took aim. The thing looked like it was going to charge, so I shot at it, and when I did, it let out this high-pitched, hellish scream, and it ran crazily fast into the trees. My girlfriend and I ran back inside, slamming the door and locking it fast. We didn't go back to sleep for the rest of the night, and we trembled in fear together whenever we heard the dogs start barking again. It was honestly the most crazy thing I've ever seen in my life, and the most terrifying. To everyone out there, don't just roll off something because it's simply a story, because more stories than you think have a basis in reality.
This happened in East Texas during the summer of 1999. My cousin Allie, my sister Becca, and I used to play together in the woods during the summer as children. Our grandparents owned a ranch there, and our parents would drop us off for weeks on end, all the way up until I was 11, Allie was 8, and Becca was 12. We'd just run out into that great hot wilderness, playing imaginative games and terrorizing Grandpa's poor dog Daisy. The woods held all kinds of wonders for kids. Armadillo holes, abandoned cars, and a shallow, dirty creek, somewhere we were absolutely forbidden to cross. At night, Grandpa would sit and chew tobacco on the porch, and he would tell us stories, while Grandma cooked cornbread and black beans on a wood stove. Those summer nights took on a magical atmosphere, with the constant hum of cicadas filling the air and the smell of smoke. One night, Grandpa set us down on the porch, and, spitting out his tobacco, he said, "When I was just your age, Jack and me built a tree house out there on the other side of the creek. Course we called it Fort Deliverance. Had a lot of battles in that fort, kept the gnomes out of the ranch. We collectively rolled our eyes. Grandpa talked a lot about the gnomes. He said they lived in these woods and would play tricks on people. He said if you looked hard enough, you could see them out of the corner of your eye, darting back into the bushes. Of course, we grew up there. We'd been through every inch of the woods and hadn't once seen one. There ain't no such thing as a gnome, Becca whined. Grandpa suddenly became very grave, and looking over his shoulder at Grandma, he whispered, "These woods make things true that ain't usually true. You believe in something hard enough, it'll come true, especially at night." Jack and me, we believed really hard in those gnomes. And with that, dinner was served. We didn't talk about the gnomes anymore. Later, when we were all trying to get to bed in the tiny bedroom reserved for the kids, Allie whispered, "I think I saw a gnome today." "Nuh-uh," I said. "That's just Grandpa's stories." I don't know, I saw them." We proceeded to mock Allie for believing in the gnomes until we grew tired of it and fell asleep. The next day, the three of us went out to the woods as usual. I remember it distinctly. It was 97 degrees, and there was the acrid smell of suntan lotion and DEET liberally applied by Grandma as we ran off. Allie ran off into the woods, and Becca pulled me aside and whispered, "Let's fool her. She's so young she'll believe any story. So let's make one up, something scary." Giggling at the prospect of terrifying my little cousin, I agreed. We walked along the banks of the shallow brown creek, kicking stones into the water. That's when my sister decided to invent the goatman, with an unsubtlety only achieved by children our age. "I went to Fort Deliverance last night," she went on in a sing-songy voice, "and I saw Mr. Goatman. He had a bottom half like a goat. He walked on hooves like this." She pantomimed a weird gait. "And he had the top half like an ugly old man with rotten teeth and big black eyes." "Yeah, I saw him too," I chimed in. "He told us to come down to his house, but we didn't go because Goatman eats children." Allie chucked a rock into the river. "Did not. We were asleep in the same room." "Well," I said, "you were asleep. Not me. I saw the Goatman, and now he knows about us." Giddy with our newfound myth, Becca and I started prancing around like goats and regaling our cousin with tales about the Goatman. "Didn't you know the Goatman made kids with catfish stew? Didn't you know the Goatman could speak to the animals and got them to spy on people? Didn't you know the Goatman lives underground and he could hear you when you walk?" Our little made-up mythology wasn't exactly consistent, but over time it became clear that Allie, at least, was taking the bait. She was asking questions about him now. Does Goatman wear clothes?" "Well, of course, but only over his man parts." "Does Goatman eat grass?" "No, only meat and bones." "Where is Goatman's hiding hole?" "Why, in the tree beneath Fort Deliverance." We spent the whole day that day talking about Goatman, and after a while it became hard to deny his existence. At least that's the way it worked in our child's minds. I guess that's the way all superstitions must form, children playing question and answer games in the woods. On our way back home, I swore I saw something move in the corner of my eye. That night, none of us could sleep. I kept thinking about the Goatman breaking off a kid's arm and throwing it in a pot of catfish stew. Eventually, Allie whispered, I'm scared, guys. Goatman can't get us in here, can he?" Becca whispered back darkly, "I don't know." The wind hitting the windows was not wind, but the howling of the Goatman. The cicadas were spying on us that night, telling Goatman how to find us. I was so sure the Goatman was the shadow in the corner, watching us. Allie woke us up sobbing several times in the night, saying she wanted her mom. She kept saying that Goatman was watching through the window while we were sleeping. After the third time this happened, Becca admitted, "Don't be scared anymore, it's annoying. I made up the Goatman, we made up the whole thing." But I saw him," she insisted. "He was in the window. He has to be real." "What do you want me to do?" Becca asked, putting a pillow over her head. "Just shut up about it, you're freaking me out. He's not real." Allie's sobs died down, and eventually we all went to bed. The next day, we had all but forgotten about the Goatman, and we stayed far away from those woods, though I still couldn't help but make sideways glances at it, fearing at times that a tree branch was a backwards-facing goat leg. A week passed, and we started playing in the woods again. This time we were pretending to be Pokemon trainers, and all claiming that we had caught the best Pokemon in this or that tree. At some point, we got the idea to try to find Fort Deliverance, which meant crossing the Forbidden Creek, leading up to a big oak tree with a decaying tree fort up top. And that's where we found Goatman. We saw him wading through the water at the far end of the creek. He was looking down at the water intently. He walked with a strange gait. He was sunburned all over his pale body, gray hair sprouting from his back. He had a spindly gray beard, beady black eyes, and a mouthful of crooked teeth. We didn't see his legs, but we were sure of what they were. We stood silent for a moment, too scared to move. Then Goatman lurched suddenly and grabbed something slimy out of the water. He let out a strange, otherworldly cackle as he pulled a catfish out of the creek by his mouth, and he tossed it to the shore. The three of us turned and ran. In the panic, Allie tripped on a tree branch and stumbled into a small ravine. She was screaming. When we turned to help her, we saw that she had impaled her small right foot on a sharp stone. She was bleeding with a twisted ankle. Sobbing, the three of us sat there. We had no idea what to do. Becca, without explanation, got up and ran as fast as she could away from the two of us, leaving Allie and I alone in the ravine. I still have nightmares about her bounding up the slope as I screamed for her to come back and help us. I tried to pick Allie up and get her to walk. Goatman came through the foliage at the top of the ravine, dripping with water and holding the catfish in his hand. I swore I saw his reversed, hoofed feet. Allie closed her eyes. I was tempted to do the same, but then I remembered what Grandpa had said about believing in things. "I don't believe in you," I screamed at Goatman over and over again. "We made you up. You're not real." "What in blazes are you kids doing?" Grandpa said from behind me. Becca had gone to get him. "You're gonna get yourself hurt bounded around like that." When I turned back toward the Goatman, he was gone. Grandpa came down into the ravine to help us. We were all crying our eyes out and blubbering about the Goatman. "That's all right, kids, I believe you," is all Grandpa would say to us. We never went back into those woods. For years, the three of us have told inconsistent stories about the events. Becca claims that there was never even a man in the water, that she was just playing along with it. Allie says it was probably just a local fishing for catfish. But me, I know it was the Goatman. I think I was the only one to see his legs. Grandpa died 2 months ago, and he put in his will the three of us. We got joint ownership of the deed to the property. Now that some of us have kids of our own on the way, we're thinking about turning it into a summer retreat, even though it's been largely abandoned for the past few years, with our grandparents' health failing. We're planning on going out there to clean things up next weekend. I think the Goatman has affected us all in different ways. For Becca, he's a sign of hysteria. Goatman is what happens when you have a group of impressionable people who all want to believe something really badly. Allie, on the other hand, has channeled her fear of the Goatman into religion. Satan is like her new Goatman, except she's not nearly as afraid of him. And as for me, every time I walk over a creek or river, I shiver a bit. Those woods have eyes, and they stare back at me. I know he's just a stupid myth that we made up, but that doesn't make him any less real. I'm planning on going out to Fort Deliverance and fixing it up this weekend. It will be my personal project. I think Grandpa would have wanted it. Hopefully then, I can put all this stuff to rest. This wasn't a sighting per se, as I never actually got a good look at whatever decided to antagonize me. I can't decide if that makes me happy or if it made the experience all the more terrifying. I live in a rural part of Maryland that is chock full of weird creatures and spooky folktales. Big Liz, werewolves in Delaware, Swatman of Delmarva, the list goes on. But the Goatman himself, he always just seemed too far-fetched for me. That is, until the spring of 2003. My parents had moved us to a new house the previous year, a dilapidated, run-down old thing. but I loved it for one reason. It sat on nearly 4 acres of woods. It had plenty of space to roam around and explore as a young kid. Christmas the prior year had been pretty nice, giving me a few girly things, but also some new outdoorsy things, like a BB gun and a Swiss knife. But the thing that I loved most of all was this silly little Charmander clock that would make Charmander noises and play a snippet of the Pokemon theme as its alarm. I set the thing every night religiously, and I woke up ready to conquer everything school could throw at me the next day. One day, I set my alarm as usual, but when it went off at 6:30, all hell broke loose, because a huge force hit the wall of my bedroom from the outside, shaking the entire house and causing things to fall off of my shelves. I literally yelped and fell out of my bed. I sat there on the floor wondering what had happened, until my mom walked over into my room, red-faced and angry. "What the hell are you doing?" she screeched at me. I stammered out some kind of reply, but I really had no good answer beyond, it wasn't me. As you can imagine, that went over really well. Trying to shrug off the whole situation, I got ready and left for school. When I got home, I ran back to my room. I looked all over the wall, all over the floor, but there was nothing that could have generated that much force, even if it fell from somewhere really high. Cautiously, I decided I would check outside. So I walked out and looked at the outside wall of my bedroom. I found nothing on the wall itself, but I did find a weird set of footprints on the ground. It was hard to tell exactly what they were because of the grass, but it did leave enough of a footprint to tell me that whatever it was had hooves. The tracks seemed to have torn up the ground around it slightly, as if the thing had been next to the wall when my alarm went off and probably gotten spooked. My mind immediately went to a wild ram or something. The alarm clock must have freaked it out, so it attacked whatever was close by. But the yellow siding on the house was dented and warped. I had never really looked before, so I wasn't sure if it was there in the first place or if it was something new. But assuming that a wild ram couldn't do something like that, I just chalked it up to its old age. Still, though, the possible implications otherwise were terrifying to say the least. It still made me feel uneasy. So I headed back inside, for the most part forgetting that ever happened. I would still hear strange noises if I stayed up late, or if I snuck out to the living room after midnight to watch anime. Sometimes I swear I heard grunting or sniffing at the windows, but I never really got the courage to look. Occasionally, I would see flashes of brown moving through the trees during the day. I stopped going off the trails in the woods, eventually avoiding them altogether. My fear was beginning to get the best of me. A few months later, near the end of the summer, my best friend came over to spend the weekend with me. For the sake of the story, we'll change her name to Susie. Now, Susie didn't exactly jump at the chance to go running through the woods like I used to, but she would walk the trails with me sometimes if she was feeling generous or brave. She must have been feeling really generous this day, as she actually suggested herself we go for a walk. I hadn't told anyone that I had stopped going out there, so of course I was caught in my own foolish pride, and away we went. The last thing I wanted to say was that I was afraid of the forest. The walk started out pleasant enough. Good company, beautiful trees, singing birds. So eventually I relaxed, and I began to enjoy the hike, even as we looped around and were heading back. That is, until the birds stopped singing, and every hair on the back of my neck stood up. "Hey," a voice called. I must have jumped a few feet in the air. Of all things I'd expected out there, a voice didn't make the list. Susie called out in reply, "Who's there?" The voice chuckled. I felt shivers run up my spine. That sound was eerily similar to the sniffing noises I'd been hearing at night. "You both look so cute. Why don't you come over here?" the voice said. It sounded odd, like having a sore throat and they were trying to overcompensate by enunciating every word. The kicker was that the voice kind of sounded like my brother, and kind of like my neighbor, switching between the tones like it couldn't decide who to be. Survival mode kicked in. I looked deeper into the woods, trying to pinpoint this stranger. Last thing I wanted was for us to run smack dab into some psycho's open arms. Especially you, Sarah. You look really cute. And that was enough. We were done. Realizing the voice was off and to the left, deeper into the woods, I grabbed Susie's hand and dashed back to the house. Susie, still shaken, looked at me with frightened eyes. We didn't speak of it again. We just pretended it hadn't happened at all. Hindsight being 20/20, we probably should have. It could have been a pervert for all we knew then. A few years later, and I'm cruising the web when I come across a site for strange things in Maryland. While reading, I learned more about the goatman, even going into his ridiculous origin story. I laughed at first, but I kept reading. The farther I got, the more relieved I was that we moved into a new house not too long after our encounter. The goatman supposedly can mimic voices, luring people to their untimely deaths. He's been known to throw his body against cars, and he more than often has cloven hooves. I can say that I'm glad I never actually saw this goatman. What little I did experience was quite enough, thank you very much. I drove by that house not too long ago since I was feeling a bit nostalgic and was in the area. It's falling down now due to neglect and a sinking foundation, but the dent in the siding is still there, and the woods seem to be the same. I just know that I'm never going back in there to see if he's still around.